Beloved Minister Indranee Rajah, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you today for this exclusive fireside chat with Minister Indranee Rajah. And the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding between the Singapore Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and as we realized during COVID-19, digital transformation has reduced the cost of engaging in international trade, facilitated the coordination of global value chains, GVCs, helped diffuse ideas and technologies, and connected a greater number of businesses and consumers globally. But even though it has never been easier to engage in international trade, the adoption of new business models has risen to more complex international trade transactions and policy issues. Underpinning digital trade is the movement of data, which is also an asset that can itself be traded. Data is also at the core of new and rapidly growing service supply models such as cloud computing, the Internet of Things, and additive manufacturing. Digitalization is also changing how we trade goods and how we secure financing. For example, the growth of online platforms has led to a rising number of small packages being sold across international borders. This is giving rise to a range of issues for policymakers, ranging from physical management of parcel trade through to the implication of risk management, such as in relation to counterfeit goods or biosecurity standards, and revenue implications in relation to collection of taxes and tariffs. Micro-logistics is redefining supply chains, helping SMEs think big and go small. I believe today's fireside chat will give us an insight into the Minister's perspective on digital trade and how global financing services will reshape the future of SMEs. The Singapore Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry is planning to become a gateway of opportunity for those exploring digital trade and financing services. To that end, we have customized information services for SMEs delivered through our SME Center at SICCI, which operates at Stanley Street and Little India. SICCI has also looked into to nurture aspiring entrepreneurs and help businesses to become innovative. In this, I see a strong partner in Proxtetra, which has helped entrepreneurs to build an international trading and financing ecosystem. Together, I'm confident that we will establish a mutually beneficial platform to connect members of business organizations, advance economic growth, and create opportunities for expansion. We would like to see the continuation of our joint efforts for building a long-term and strategic partnership between SICCI and Proxtetra. Today's event comes to an important juncture where we use this MOU to further advance our partnership and support. The MOU, which will be signed after the fireside chat, supports programs and activities that will provide entrepreneurs with the skills and access that will enhance their opportunity for success in the marketplace. Proxtetra is an aggregator of trading platforms. It is a facilitator between industries. It operates an open and global network facilitating information interchange for customers of B2B platforms to be connected to one another and to the digital service providers. Proxtera encourages the end-to-end digitalization of SME businesses by streamlining transaction management through harmonized documentation and information fields, simplifying each step of the trading lifecycle. With SICCI's collaboration, it hopes to create one of the largest trading network riding on Singapore's FTA arrangements. For trade associations, Proxtera works to leverage digitalization of associate members through quick onboarding and enhanced connectivity. As a startup, Proxtera will work with SICCI to raise funds and expand into the South Asian and African markets. Working together, I know that we will enhance both our organizations and develop substantial ties in the long run. This is even more important now as the world is ravaged by COVID-19 and the businesses must rethink their avenues of cooperation and growth. Our partnership will be instrumental in guiding entrepreneurs connect to a larger trading ecosystem and to reap the benefits of the network. Let me say a big thank you to MAS, IMDA, the staff of Proxtera, and SICCI, who have just begun the collaboration and who will pursue this partnership towards positive ends. Special thanks to Mr. Eugene Go from MAS, Shirish Jain, Program Director, Proxtera, and Winston Nesbitt, partners at PwC Strategy. As we enter a phase of recovery following COVID-19, businesses and entrepreneurs must stand ready to adapt to a changing world, to address the new norms, to compete in the global market. Now, I would like to introduce, of course, Minister Indranee. She needs no introduction. She carries a string of important national responsibilities, but added to that is her advisory role at SICCI. I first knew her as an MP in the early 90s. She is charming now as she was, and privileged to have seen her blossom into one of Singapore's finest ministers, helming as the leader of the House since 2020, serving as a second minister for finance and second minister for national development. Now, this is by no means a small feat. She started her career as a litigator and had an active court practice as advocate and solicitor, specializing in cross-border dispute resolutions. She was appointed to a senior counsel by the Chief Justice of Singapore in January 2003. Indeed, it's now my pleasure, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to officially ignite the fireside chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chandru, for the wonderful remarks. May I now invite Honorable Minister Indranee Rajah, Dr. T. Chandru, and Mr. Winston Nesbitt to take the stage for the next part of our program.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome again. My job here today, and good afternoon to all of you, is to facilitate a fun and hopefully inspiring fireside chat. And the topic is about the future of trade, and specifically the importance of digital infrastructure and financing. Those accumulated here include dignitaries, SICCI leadership, who are experts really in the history of trade. So for the next 20 minutes, what we want to focus on is what we see over the horizon. And the chairman already started to set the scene, talking about data. Because if you ask the average player about the $40 trillion of value that goes through currently goods and services, what you think about is often a large multinational exchanging goods and services for value. But what we've seen in the last 5 years, really post-financial crisis, is that the rate of change in terms of goods, services, and finance has actually declined. Still growing, but has declined. What has exploded has been an underlying flow of data that supports goods and services. In many ways, enables it, and in some cases, it's digitally native goods and services. So what we want to just take a peek at and then open it up for discussion is what are the implications of that. Although significant because it's the fastest growing sector, it's really about 10% or less of global trade today. So why focus on it? It's the fastest growing sector, and many predict up to 50 to 70% in a couple of decades will be digitally enabled trade. So incumbents need to understand those models. And what we want to speak about today is really the implications, such as for smaller enterprises and individuals who can now access buyers and sellers cross-border, and the increasing role that they can play. The fact that innovation and ideas used to go from advanced economies into emerging economies. And now, almost instantaneously, innovation is going 2 directions, which has implications for Singapore, ASEAN, and Asia-Pac. So what will determine whether it's 50%, 70% of trade becomes natively digital? It's the ability for players assembled here, fintech startups, policymakers, industry veterans, to adapt to this new model. And while I will not go through it in detail, I'll suggest that there's 5 enablers that will make the rosy picture rosier. And I will list them out, and I trust our panelists will then more eloquently talk to them. But in my way of looking at the future, digital trade and the promise for it will be realized if we can get access to infrastructure. No surprise, it's our tagline. But access to both quality physical and digital infrastructure is a key enabler. Access to the underlying data flows. A lot of the super apps that we see are actually a platform to collect data on your behaviors and insights. And how do we democratize that data and make it available to not just one closed system, but to industry players? Interoperability. We've seen it here in Singapore in the QR code space, but the ability to create one interconnected set of data flows, domestic and cross-border, will disproportionately impact or uplift our SME and smaller enterprises. Number 4, of course, is access to finance. And we'll talk a bit about that. 80% of trade has some form of trade finance. So if you cannot access finance, you are not in business for most players. And lastly, but by no means least, our ability to ensure access to and our ability to create, especially for the smaller players, digital trust, digital education and enablement, and digital security, cybersecurity. To the extent that we can get these 5 things aligned to the promise that technology has provided, will enable whether or not we realize this move to digital economies, and how fast and who can enjoy those benefits. So instead of me talking further, what I might do at this point is to engage our esteemed panelists into a fireside chat. We've got our fire. So allow me to start off, and very soon we'll be coming to the floor or to our remote audience, which I understand is quite an assembled virtual group, for any questions that we can fit into our program, and then allow SICCI to lead off into their AGM. Minister Indranee, thank you again, and if I may start off with you. The first question that we had today was, how far-reaching do you view this transition of global trade flows to digital economies? And what's the impact, say, to many stakeholders, including SMEs?
I would say that digital economies are the way of the future. You obviously do still need brick and mortar, but what digital has done is it's extended your reach phenomenally. It's also actually, if done right, levels the playing field between the big boys and the small ones. Because before, you needed to be a big company with big resources, and then you needed to have a presence overseas, and all of those overheads that came with it. But now actually you don't, because if the customer can find you on the website and send the order directly to you, you've got a customer, and you didn't have to incur all of those costs. At the same time, the payment needs to be done well, and the point that you made about trust is very important, because sooner or later everything's going to be rated, right? So your goods and services are going to be rated as well. Your service delivery will be rated, and people will see it. It will be there for the whole world to see. So I would say the face of business is already being transformed, and it's going to be transformed even further. And for SMEs in particular, it's really important we need to be able to ride on this. Which is why, ever since he became Finance Minister, BKM Heng Swee Keat has been pushing a lot on digital economy, innovation, productivity solutions, SMEs go digital. I mean, every budget for the last 5 years has had something in there which is for businesses to be able to tap on to help them to reinvent and innovate. But this alone is not enough, I think, particularly for SMEs, because you can't write this unless you have the skill sets within your workforce. Those skill sets could either be people that you employ directly, or it could be services that you purchase. But when it came to digital, when we had conversations with SMEs, one of the big problems for SMEs would be, I can't customize from scratch. It doesn't make sense. It's just too expensive. And within the SME, you may not have the entire range of knowledge that you need for accessing various digital platforms. So another strategy that one could look at is having a platform that many SMEs in the same sector or different sectors can share. Because that way, you don't have the cost of development, you don't have the cost of customization, but the trade associations and chambers can play a role to either identify, help to purchase, do it on a subscription basis. I mean, there's no prescriptive one-size-fits-all. It depends on the sector, depends on what you're doing. But the role of the trade association and chambers in helping to catalyze this change for their members is hugely important. So, I mean, that's where I'm coming from, that the government support, please tap on it, but within SMEs to be able to equip yourselves to have the capability to leverage the digital economy, because there's no going back. It's only going forward, and if there's anything that COVID-19 has done, it has demonstrated how important it is to have digital capability. When I spoke to SICCI, which as you know is the Association for the Accountants, I asked them, how are the companies doing? Because, you know, they got to do audit, they got to do payroll and so on. They said that those companies which had gone onto digital systems for their payments, for their invoicing, or payroll, those were actually okay through the circuit breaker and so on, because they didn't need people to go in the office and do the manual vouchers and manually check and search for the invoices. It could all be done remotely. That's just a small example of how it's changing, and any company, SME or otherwise, that's not on the digital bandwagon is going to be left behind. So yeah, just some thoughts on that.
Thank you. Chairman, I'll extend the same question to you. How far-reaching is this move to digital economies? You started to address that in your opening remarks.
Thank you for asking me. I mean, ministers have articulated very well the importance of change. Change is something that we must all embrace. Change in technology, digitalization. This is something we all must accept. I like what you said earlier about digital security, digital trust, and the comfort in accepting that. We have, you know, our membership strength, 800-900, 50% of them are traders. I see the need for these traders to change from something to digital. If they don't, then it will be affected. The documentation side, we are operating now currently through the traditional method. You know, we issue certificate of audit. So it's very traditional still. We are in the process. We have tied up with Crimson Lodge, which is successful. 60 over countries with custom services facilities. Working with them to go on the processes of the I'm aggressively pushing. In fact, we have set up, for this purpose, we have set up the Assembly Center at Little India. We are pushing the retailers to go digital. Again, coming back to digital trust, digital security, I think the traditional Indian retail businessmen are such that they are very comfortable, you know, in receiving cash and keeping it in the cash register. And it's also very Indian-like. It's very, you know, very customary for the Indians, you know, that we must see money and we must feel them. When the money is transacted and goes directly to the bank, we feel that we are not, we are not seeing money, so the money is not going through my hands. It's a very, very traditional way of.
If you can't touch it, it's not real.
But I believe the second generation, those who are taking over their fathers and the others' business, I think they are changing. So I will eventually see that change.
Thank you.
Could I just add one thing? Maybe you didn't contemplate when you asked me the question, but I feel obliged to point it out, especially to many of you who are employers, which is that the digital economy also includes working remotely. And this was something that we saw during the circuit breaker, people working from home, which prior to the circuit breaker, many businesses would have said not possible or cannot be done. But the circuit breaker demonstrated that it was possible, that it can be done, and for certain companies, actually more productive. Now that we've gone into phase 3, although with the recent clusters, I think we'll be watching very carefully, and we've got up to 75% of the workforce back. The workforce, a good number of them, have now having tasted work from home, actually there will be more demand and a push for that. And this is one of those things which I suspect there's no going back either. In this regard, I want to make a distinction between work from home, which is the phrase commonly used, and flexible work arrangements, which is the phrase MON uses for good reason. Work from home suggests that everything is done at home. Flexible work arrangements does not assume that. In fact, under flexible arrangements, the assumption is that depending on the sector, you could, well, the default could be work in the office, but as and when there is a need, you can allow the employee to work from home, meaning he or she does not have to take leave. It is not held against them, it's not docked against pay. And I do urge SMEs in particular to take note of this, because it's going to affect your ability to recruit and to employ. Because I say this from my NPTV hat, because under National Population Television, one of my responsibilities is to see how we can boost Singapore's TFR. And when we speak to young families, one of the feedback that always comes back is stress, inability to manage the home responsibilities and work responsibilities, and there are always these increasing calls for childcare leave. But if we mandate more and more or legislate more and more childcare leave, we know that that has an impact on companies as well. But if employers factor in flexible work arrangements such that as and when needed, the employees can work from home and work remotely, then you won't have as much pressure to actually have legislated childcare leave. Because at the end of the day, what's the objective? The objective is that the parent should be able to have enough time to take care of the child, or in some cases the elderly person. And as long as that objective is met, and your objective of productivity and making sure the customer is satisfied, or the sale and the transaction is closed, that's also met, then it can be a win-win. So this is a different aspect of the digital economy, but it's quite important, because the concept of work from anywhere is going to grow, I think, and it's going to gain momentum. And if you are looking at recruitment of younger people, that's going to be one of the things they will look for.
Thank you for that. Minister, I'm going to continue with you and ask you a bit of a report card question, which is, in the context of digital infrastructure and financing, do you believe Singapore is leading the way in this new space?
I would say that Singapore has made many moves in the right direction. I hesitate to sort of claim any crowns, but what I can say is that we've identified this as a growth area. We know that if we're not tapped into the digital economy, then we're going to be left behind. And we want to make sure that we're right up there, when it takes off even more than it has already. So digital infrastructure, as you mentioned before, that's very important, but not sufficient, because having the infrastructure is one thing, but making sure that the people are able to leverage it, to take advantage of it, make use of it, is another thing. Hence, Skills Future and all the money that the government has put aside for you to tap on to make sure that you can equip your workforce to leverage the digital economy is really important. Digital financing, MAS has been very proactive. They were looking at fintech right from the very beginning. They've had the sandboxes, and they've been very willing to experiment. So I would say that our pace and approach is healthy, but I think that there's more that we can do. But we have to have a pace that people can follow as well. Because you can race right ahead, and if companies are not on board and not everybody is able to access it, then it doesn't meet the objective that we want.
Ask if this audio might be better, because I've gotten feedback that this is not working. So just let me transition the digital. Chairman, how can organizations like SICCI pair with Singapore to reimagine global prominence in either in the Singapore-India corridor, in the broader Asia-Pac? What do you see as an ecosystem player that SICCI can do to partner with Singapore as you have in the past?
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, the work. I think it is a change of mindset. The older generation businessmen who are used to the traditional way of doing business, I think they must be ready to make this shift. Two, I think they should encourage their second or third generation leaders or family members who are taking over the business, who eventually and ultimately will adopt this digital change and accept this entire transformation. As a chamber, I think it is important that we educate our members, especially the older members. I think it's so very important that we must educate them. And like it or not, the entire COVID has taught all of us that we can't just be dependent on this old traditional way of doing business. That's why we call it not a new normal. Let it be the way good offers, the way it trusts up. And interestingly, it's an observation. These days after COVID, I don't see many coming for even big functions with ties these days. The way we dress up all changed now. I think change is something that we must accept and embrace. And the chamber will have already started the process, but will aggressively push on the digitalization. I think we are encouraging companies to go digital. Our government is so good and kind enough to offer so many grants and incentives. We are pushing that. Our SICCI centers are working very hard to reach out to not just Indian companies. The SICCI center caters for all of them. Now it's a fully funded, ESG funded operation. SICCI plays its part in terms of facilitating. Now their job is to reach out, not just Indian companies owned by Indians, but all SMEs. Talk to them, approach them, and tell them this is what you have, and this is what you should be, and guide them through. So we have already started, and we are going to encourage the traders, for example. Our MOU now, we are about to sign with Procter. There is one that we are going to push it through. We are going to probably, look at how we can expand, work together with them, and expand that. So we have already started working.
I must acknowledge one such government investment, which is the partnership with Prostera, the organization I represent, which is one of the multiple ways that the government has taken to innovation, but in partnership with the private sector, to ultimately address some of those issues about cost of customization for SMEs and being able to create a platform to help others connect into that. So I must acknowledge Singapore's progressive role in such partnerships with the private sector.
Thank you, and actually, it's good that you mentioned that because this gives me an opportunity to remind everyone about SG Together and the Alliances for Action. Because as you know, SG Together was launched by DPMK, and it was really to signal a different way of working, a different way of navigating a new decade and effectively, a new century. In the past, government led the way on many things, purely as government. But as the world has become increasingly complex, we do recognize that, especially in the world of business, it is actually the businesses that are the front leaders for many things. Government's advantage is that we can be a convener, we can intervene, we can make laws, but government can't do the business. Government cannot persuade other businesses, and government is not the one that is doing your business innovation. It can help you grants to acquire it and facilitate it, but it's not doing it. So this idea of partnering with businesses is really important, because then it becomes very powerful. Because as businesses, you're at the forefront of doing the trade, of being in the sector, you know what the changes are, and you know what's happening on the ground. If there's a close relationship and a close partnership with government, the feedback that comes in, the ideas that come in, allows government to channel grants and funding, or to shape the policy for the grants and funding in the right way, so that it's targeted to encourage the right kind of behavior and response. It also allows government to open doors for you, particularly if, let's say, we have trade missions or whatever it is, or now we're doing it all on Zoom. But that partnership is powerful. And when Minister Desmond Lee led the Emerging Stronger Together task force, together with Mr. Tan Chong Nil from ESA, one of the key outcomes of that was to have alliances for action, meaning that in a particular sector, groups of entities, individuals, or whatever it is, come together to push for change. You pilot it. If it works and succeeds, then you can replicate it with others. So that comes back to your point, that idea of partnership. And I strongly encourage SMEs in particular to look at this, see how you can get into some of the alliances for action, or even create your own. Because there's a limit to what each individual entity can do yourself. But when you partner with others, you really are stronger together. And when you partner with government can bring things to the table which private sector would not normally have access to. So yeah, that's the power partnership.
Chairman, I wanted to let you know that I did consider wearing a tie, but CEO Johnson said it gets hot by the fire. So I think. Do we have time for 2 questions? Just checking with. Do we have time? I'm going to take one question from the remote crowd and one question from the floor. Let me start with this one. In my setup, I was really addressing the enablers that will help us move faster to digital trade. One of the questions that's come through the chat is interesting, because it's talking about some of the potentially negative impacts of moving quickly to, as the questioner asked, the hyper-connected flow of people and materials can be seen positively and negatively. COVID-19 pandemic is an illustration in their mind of a hyper-connected flow of people and materials. If out of control of any one nation, unless it ends through global coordination. So the question is, should we be concerned about hyper-connected information out of the control of any one nation?
Whoever asks questions, is it possible to just indicate what you mean by hyper-connected, or do you have a sense of what?
So it's a remote question.
Okay.
So let me interpret. I think the move to platforms has created a concentration of information that tracks the behaviors, the preferences, and sometimes the thoughts and words of large sections of our population. And that sits outside the control of any one nation. So the question that is being posed here is, should we be concerned about these hyper-connected, I'll use the word platforms, that are outside government control?
I think the answer is that you should be concerned if the platforms that are the recipients or that hold this hyper-connected information don't use it or deal with it responsibly. I think that is the key. And in order to use or deal with it responsibly, there has to be a certain common understanding of what that means. I mean, it could involve things, for example, like removing certain types of content. It could involve blocking somebody. It could involve having to cooperate with authorities sometimes when they're investigating, etc. So global effort is important because you do need to have a common understanding of what you should remove, what you should block. Some of it will be country specific, because different countries have different norms and different laws. So to that extent, you'll have to work with different countries. But as time goes on, I would imagine that you do need to have more and more of coordination and a common understanding of what at least is the very minimum. I mean, hate speech, I think, is something everybody can agree on. If it's on platforms, then you need to remove that. But I think it's the data that's even more important because platforms are using these data for insights. So governments have to think whether or not the use should be regulated. And even if you regulate the use, how do you enforce? How do you even know whether it's being used in a particular way? So it's an evolving space. I do remember when the social media first made its appearance on the scene in the mid 2000s, early 2000s. The thought at that stage was that this is wonderful because it allows everything to be said freely, and somehow people will police themselves, and that everybody will do the right thing automatically. It doesn't work that way. So you can't run away from a certain amount of regulation. You can't run away from rules and data. Once it's in people's hands or in the company's hands, you may have to regulate how that is used. So I hope that answers the question somewhat.
Thank you, Minister. We have time for one more question.
I'm glad that there has been a lot of discussion about the effect that this will have for SMEs because the training community, both not only in SICCI but the other chambers, have a substantial number of SMEs. I think we have to convince them of the advantages of shifting from existing platforms to this platform that we have just spent time discussing. But I think before we close, we, the audience here as well as those outside, need to understand who is behind Coursera, how is Coursera organized. Maybe you can briefly tell us that for sure.
Sure. Maybe I will take this question, but I would start off by saying very soon in the future, we hope SICCI will be one of the players behind Coursera, in addition to our current private sector members, as well as our significant grant-based support from both the MAS, FinTech, Financial Sector Development Fund, and in collaboration with IMBA. So Coursera is in many ways what would be considered a public-private partnership. In that sense, our structure is unique, but our ownership is totally private, and as I said, we look forward to extending it beyond the MOU with SICCI. But there's one thing I would need to just move back to in your question when you said we need to convince SMEs to leave their platform to join Coursera. I just wanted to highlight a very important principle in the Coursera business model, which is we aim to connect existing marketplaces so we avoid the need to have SME and SME platforms leave their favorite platform. We actually want to create the glue that connects different platforms through data and other process standardization. So in many ways, my answer to a SICCI SME is to get your favorite platform to connect to Coursera and then benefit from that increased reach and increased enablement in terms of finance and other logistical and value-added services. So I just wanted to highlight that. But I know that we are running short on time, so I would ask CEO Johnson, do we have time for one more question? Or I think what we might do is thank the panelists for coming by the fire with me today, and we might end our discussion, or at least pause it for today.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister Dr. Chandru and Mr. Vincent, for the interesting session. May I now invite CEO Mr. Johnson Paul and Program Lead of Prospera Mr. Winston Nesfield to proceed to the table of MO signing. Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Winston. May I call upon Dr. Chandru to kindly present a memento to the Honorable Minister as a token of her appreciation. May I request? May I request Honorable Minister to be seated? May I now invite Dr. Chandru to kindly present a memento to Mr. Winston. May I now invite Mr. Douglas Fu to receive a memento from Dr. Chandru.
Okay, stop over here. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of the session. May I also request you to remain seated as the Honorable Minister, Dr. T. Chandru and Mr. Douglas Fu take leave.
Everybody, thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, Board of Directors, you may now take leave.